9 years ago, as of about 2 weeks ago, the NinjaGo pilots aired on Cartoon Network for the first time, officially kicking off the NinjaGo story. I planned to do a video of it that week, but I was busy working on a project and didn't have time. The week after that, I was exhausted from having worked on said project for a week straight and didn't have the energy to do one. So, 2 weeks late, I'm finally taking a look back at the NinjaGo pilots 9 years later. The first thing that's noticeable looking back is the upgrade in visuals the show has had since 2011. That's pretty obvious because of how much time has passed, but oh my goodness, the pilots haven't aged well. This was early in Will Film's animation in terms of television length content, and it's interesting to see how things have changed. For instance, the pilots more than anything after them really seem Lego-y to a degree. What I mean by this is that the characters seem to behave as if they're in a Lego-built world to a degree, despite it not looking that way. Skulkin can remove their heads and have them bounce around free of their bodies, which is in line with the Lego Adventures of Clutch Powers movie that was released the year prior. For a time, it was thought that both it and NinjaGo existed in the same worlds, but with Season 11, we now know that NinjaGo merely has a different version of the same character. The ninja also used the Tornado of Creation to build a Ferris wheel out of bones, which is the only other time in NinjaGo's history where building something didn't require a drill or wires or a welder. At first glance, it seems to break the rules of the universe we've come to know, but thinking about it further, I think the show isn't out considering that in the case of the Skulkin heads and building a Ferris wheel, these two things happen to involve magic bones from the underworld. Everything else the ninja built needs to be treated like the real world, and if a person were decapitated, they'd die. But since these things are from another realm in the world, it still works and feels cohesive. But it's interesting to note how the creative, sillier side of Lego that we saw in the Clutch Powers movie did manage to work its way into NinjaGo's early days. In terms of retcons for the future, I found the wording woo used when describing the elements the ninja had as interesting. Where elemental powers come from in NinjaGo's flip-flopped over the years, but from how he spoke in the pilots, you can make the assumption that the ninja have the ability to control some elemental powers independent of their weapons. It's just a matter of training and finding their true potential. So that's an interesting part of the lore that ended up being expanded on. And speaking of lore, the basic premise of building the world of NinjaGo is decently fleshed out to start us out with. To Bionicle fans still lamenting the end of the theme in 2011, the idea of two brothers fighting over their home was familiar, yet the changes were refreshing and kept NinjaGo distinct. Although I do remember thinking that it was just a little too close to Bionicle's story for my complete liking at the time. But when Season 1 started, that went away. One of the reasons I thought this at the time was because of the main villain of the theme, Lord Garmadon. Garmadon is a wildly different villain from Makuta now, but in 2011, he seemed like a carbon copy. He spoke from the shadows in a calm, whispery tone, the way Makuta communicated with Takua in Mask of Light, and had a master plan that everyone was a part of. While the Bionicle story jumped through hoops to show how Pterodax was planning circles around everyone, the pilots more or less said, just accept it, in terms of Garmadon planning for Samukai's betrayal and using that to open a portal to the realm of madness. And speaking of that moment, there's a weird part where Wu's voice actor changes for 2 lines and someone else plays him, but uncredited. I don't know the reason for this, but watching it in 2020 and being used to what Wu sounds like, it's weird. I wonder if it's a temp track that was accidentally left in or something. And speaking of weird voices, it's time to talk about the ninja. Kai and Cole sound exactly like they do 9 years later, but Jay and Zane's voice are different to a degree. Zane certainly sounds like Brent Miller and the writers trying to figure out who the character is. Wu says he has a second sense that never comes up again after the pilots, which seems to be the explanation for why he's different and doesn't have any people skills. Constantly being bombarded with spiritual messages would make anyone a little different, but I guess for where they went with it, that sense was just his scanner or something. He uses it a lot in the future once he's completely robotized, so I guess that's how they could retcon it if they really wanted to explain that. The monotone delivery of the character certainly helped build a mystique to the character that opened up the possibilities for him being a robot and giving us one of the best NinjaGo episodes of all time. Jay, I have a little bit more of a problem with. The sarcastic and joking nature of Jay is front and center and true to who he is as a character later on in the series, but his voice is something.
Yeah. It's too much for us mortals. All right, guys, let's chop sake this lemonade stand. Cole, you got the plan? Hey, guys! It's just like the training course. Over the planks, dodge the swords, here comes the dummy. Ka-ching!
Hey, Nia, maybe after this you want to go for a Oh, Jay.
It starts off as a stereotype New York or New Jersey type accent with an occasional moment where it sounds like what we're used to. This voice persists early into Season 1, but the accent is dropped completely about midway through and we get what we've been used to for years. It's super interesting to look back at these early parts of the show to see what they changed from when they started. For instance, does everyone remember when Cole was supposed to be the leader of the group? Kai and Lloyd sure don't. While it's never blatantly stated that he's the leader of the 4 ninja, it's obvious by the way he's described and by how he's placed in the show. When the ninjas show up at the Caves of Despair, Jay asks Cole if he's got a plan, like this is a usual occurrence. When Kai rushes in on his own, Cole tells him off like a leader would. When the ninja are pulling Wu in the horse buggy, Cole's front and center with the other three behind him. It's funny to see how what was supposed to be the leader character getting usurped by two other characters to the point that Cole lacking personality is a common complaint. And speaking of a lack of personality, Nia is here too. Her role is basically to serve as a damsel in distress for Kai to save, but she does prove to be a good fighter and isn't totally worthless. While the pilots don't do much with her character, the show would of course make good use of her most of the time. Of all the new, at the time, characters introduced, Wu seems to be the most fleshed out at the start. We know his backstory from what he tells Kai, and he fulfills the mentor position on the team very well. He has the best moments of the 2 episodes, from line delivery to action scenes. All the voice actors do a good job of what they're given, and the story is decent. Back in the day, I used to be a staunch defender of the idea that the pilots were season 1 despite being only 2 episodes. While I still see them as a season, nowadays they do work better as season 0 and not season 1 because of the minimal story present. Season 1 of the show really proves what kind of a runaway hit the theme was as a whole, and that these 2 pilots were a test run to see what they could do. It's a solid start for the show as a whole, setting things up to be explored later on. While the animation hasn't aged well, the pilots as a whole hold up pretty well and are fun to watch to go back and reminisce about. That's going to be pretty much it, and while it isn't a long video, that's really all I have to say because there isn't too much to talk about when it comes to the pilots. If I had to put them in a ranked list, I'd put them between Season 2 and March of the Oni, considering it's the start of the show as a whole and it's still working on establishing the world. The pilots in Season 1 did everything well enough to make NinjaGo a compelling world that even when Seasons 2 and 3 were somewhat disappointing, we keep on coming back for more years later. All I ask now is, where's Season 12?